الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Bismillah walhamdulillah. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If I can ask you guys to just move in a bit so that as people come in to pray, they're still able to have a comfortable place to pray. That would be great, inshallah. So we started last week talking about the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. Referring to the biography of the Messenger of God. And we gave different reasons as to why one might study the Seerah, what some of the sources of the Seerah are. If you missed this session, you could catch up to it online, podcast, YouTube, so you can go through some of that. But today we're going to start to get into the actual content of the Seerah. And the idea is for us to also just extrapolate meaning from it, right? Integral part to our theology is building a love for the Messenger of God, to take him as an example. The Seerah also makes the Quran very concrete. So where people have challenges from more culturally hegemonic attitudes towards religion, or at times are offering an insight that something is religious as an absolute versus its permissibility doesn't equate to normativity. Just because it can be done a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way for it to be done. The Seerah gives us room to say, well, here's something definitive. This is how the Messenger of God, alayhi salam, lived this verse of the Quran, and it manifested in these ways. So we want to be able to talk out some of these things, what are lessons we can derive. So we're not just memorizing names or approaching it in terms of date memorization, but to extrapolate from it insight that's applicable and relevant to our day-to-day living. Does that make sense? So we mentioned a bunch of sources of Seerah literature last week, and two of them that were actual texts we said was a religious scholar from centuries ago by the name of Ibn Ishaq, and then another by the name of Ibn Hisham. And what Ibn Ishaq does is he writes a multi-volume text on the life of the Prophet of God, 10 or 12 volumes, a big kind of set of books. And then Ibn Hisham, he condenses this. And one of the things that he does is that Ibn Ishaq is writing a Seerah text that essentially is chronicling a sense of history from the beginning to where they are in real time. And Ibn Hisham, he takes out some of that and starts a little bit closer to the life of the Prophet of God. We're going to be starting from the establishment of the city of Mecca, which is where the Prophet is born and where Islam is introduced, and to give a context into what's the circumstance here on the ground that we can pull from, parallels where we can draw lessons from. So it's not just in a vacuum, right? Quite often someone says, here's a hadith, this is what it says, and this is what I'm going to do with it. Do you know? Without being able to relate text to context. Or looks at a hadith and only can extrapolate singularized meaning from it, as opposed to looking at it for secondary and tertiary benefits. Do you know? I was in Turkey, and there's a hadith where many of you might know, there's a woman who's a known prostitute that gives water to a thirsty animal, and from this one act of mercy, God gives her entrance into heaven, right? May Allah make us all people of heaven, people of Jannah. And you can look into that from the standpoint of so many different frames, right? When I was in Turkey, they had built giant bird feeders using that hadith as a basis for it, saying, why would we not feed animals? This hadith teaches us to. Do you get what I mean? And so that's the challenge when you just read something, but you're not really engaged in deep contemplation and reflection upon it, to say, well, how is it relevant to me? Or how do I learn about what this is, not just with this is the only thing it means, but I can take more from it, right? Does that make sense? So we're going to start with the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet Abraham, who from the standpoint of Islam as a religion is considered to be a figure that also is a prophet for people who are Arab. He's not just seen as a prophet for the people of the children of Israel, and through his lineage, his son Ismail alayhi salam, Ishmael, peace be upon him, you have now this added lineage. How does this become relevant to the city of Mecca? The Prophet Abraham, he's commanded to take his wife Hajar, who we might know as Hagar, and their son Ismail, and to take them to a desert. And some of you might be familiar with this story. You hear it perhaps around the time of Hajj, in the month of Dhul Hijjah, around the holiday of Eid al-Adha, the second major holiday in Islam in the Islamic calendar year. But you want to think about it more deeply, right? They're going now on this journey. The Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, Hajar, peace be upon her, Ismail, peace be upon him, is a child. This is like deja vu. Didn't this happen last week? Oh, yeah, same thing. All these guys walked in. Yeah, different guys. I'm sorry, I'm racist, man. All brown guys look the same. Yeah, it's okay. I'm brown too, so I can be self-loathing. And so the Prophet Ibrahim, he's walking with his wife Hajar. Their son Ismail is an infant, and she's asking with a consistency, like, why are we doing this? They're going where there is nothing. It's important to understand this. There is nothing where they are going. Desolate, desert space. Then she asks, Allahu amraka bihada, that has Allah commanded you with this? And when he says yes, she says, then Allah will not put me in a place that's beyond my ability to endure. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. And they're left there with just some water and bags of dates. The water and dates, they diminish until there's nothing left. This is a baby. The Prophet Ismail is an infant. If you've ever been around a child needs regular consumption. And so many of you have probably heard in some level this part of what also becomes a rite of the pilgrimage, whether you go for the lesser pilgrimage of Umrah or you go for a larger pilgrimage, the Hajj, where you run between two hills that are called Safa and Marwa, and it's following the Sunnah of Hajar, this mother who is running to the summits of these mountains, looking for some kind of sustenance for her infant child who is crying the way a baby would cry when they're hungry, added to the challenge that they are in the Arabian desert with nothing. And as she goes up and down these hills to their summit, where the Prophet Ismail is kicking his infant feet, it said the angel comes, strikes at that piece of earth. From that, the well of Zamzam comes forth. And it's this pool of water that is very unique. And over the course of our study of the Seerah, we're going to talk about certain things and just where the metaphysical benefit is. So Zamzam is said to be water of Jannah, right? And there's a lot of different things in Mecca and Medina. The Rawda, which is the original kind of confines of the Prophet Mosque. This is said to be from the Gardens of Paradise. The Mount Uhud is a mountain of paradise. You have the valley, the Wadi Aqiq, is a valley. You know, there's so much that goes into this. But Zamzam is said to be like a very blessed, substance. And the water has no kind of end to it. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that may Allah's mercy be upon Hajar, that had she not sought to contain the water would have flown all over kind of the earth. But she made it into a place where there was now kind of a boundary to it. They're in the middle of nothing. There's nothing there. And then all of a sudden, this water is there. Hajar, peace be upon her, is an elderly black woman. It's important to understand. Quite often, when people tell this story, they're not contextualizing with details. She's not a fair-skinned Arab lady who is in her prime. She is an elderly black woman with an infant child. Where there was nothing, now there is suddenly this well of water. When the water builds itself into this pool, birds start to flock into the middle of the desert. There's a tribe that lives in this area called the Jurhum tribe, right? If you want to take notes, Jurhum, you can write in English, Jurhum. They see these birds going into the middle of the desert where they know there is nothing. And they send now some people as emissaries to say, why are these birds going where there is nothing in the middle of the desert? And to their astonishment, they find this large body of water, this infant child, and this elderly black woman. The Jurhum tribe say to Hajar, peace be upon her, can we live here? And she says, yes, but the water is under my authority. And people start to settle around Zamzam, and this is how the city of Mecca gets established. You want to think about this in a few different frames. I'm going to give you one interjection point that is rooted in foundational understanding of Islam from the concept of just basic terminology, which is Sharia. What does the word Sharia mean? Huh? A path to what? Like linguistically, not technically. A path to water, right? In its technical sense, the word Sharia refers to Islamic law, both civil and criminal aspects of it. But in a literal sense, it refers to a path to water, the path to the watering hole. And when you liken the idea of Sharia being a path to water, and you understand that this oasis is now the epicenter of a city that, how many of you have ever been to Mecca before? Just by a show of hands. How many have ever drank Zamzam water in your life, right? You literally at one point could have gone to Mecca, and they used to let people walk into this thing. They could go in. There was no source that was saying this is where the water is coming from. Until today, there's literally millions of people on average in Mecca, in Medina. They're drinking this stuff, they're pouring it on their face, they're bringing it home for friends and family, but it still attracts life to it. And that's the idea of Sharia. It's meant to attract life to it. As a system, it's supposed to be invigorating. It's supposed to give you a sense of vitality. It's not meant to be something that's suffocating or to leave you burnt out or exhausted. And if the implementation of Sharia renders detriment as opposed to benefit, then it's probably not being put into practice in the best way, right? It's the one thing we can understand from just the establishment of the city of Mecca. I want you to think about this from any vantage point you could, as an exercise. We want to think about what's going on here, right? This city is populated with this tribe of Arab people negotiating with this woman and her baby. What does this make you think about? And think about it not in a vacuum, but think about it in relation to how you experience Muslim community, how you experience various cultures. But just this interaction now, at this moment, if you can turn to the person next to you, what do you pull from it in terms of just insights, ideas, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. So if you turn to the person next to you, ideally in pairs, so just two people, so people are all getting a chance to talk. If you need to do more than two, don't do more than three. So 2 or 3 is not 8, right? Okay? So if I see you sitting in a big circle and one person is talking, everybody else is listening, that's not going to work. You have to be comfortable. You have to want to be able to talk about this. We said last week, one of the reasons we study Seerah is to increase love for the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you got to sometimes fake it in order to get to where you want to be. If you want to love someone or you have a sign of love, you can't stop talking about them. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? So cut out the awkwardness. Don't be in a place that says, I can only say it if I'm quote unquote the most religious, or I know the best answer, or all of these kinds of things. Just what does it bring up for you? What is it kind of evoking? What insights can you draw from it? And then we'll come back and discuss. If you don't know the names of the person next to you, share names, and then we'll come back. Just 3 minutes. Go ahead. Okay. So let's come back. So what are some of the things, like this incident here, what does it bring up for you? What does it make you think about? What did you discuss? Yeah.
The point of life itself that needs water. Of course, living in the desert, I want to be near to the water, right? Especially Zamzam water, and that's attracting to life, as you mentioned, mashallah.
Okay, amazing. What else? Like about the interaction between the Jurham and Hajar, yeah.
One of the part of the story that we mentioned that she was like an old black woman with a child. She was very vulnerable, and this Arab tribe came and they respected the boundaries and they respected the fact that she wanted authority, and they respected that she wanted they respected each other. Like there was no hierarchy in that interaction, and that's how the city was built on
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I was respecting the word that came up with us, but also peace, just how it wasn't like neither one of them claimed it for themselves. There was kind of like that aspect of asking and then also like respecting the kind of gift that was given from God.
Yeah, what is going on here? Right? You gotta think about this. You see the number of you that are in this room? Think about this multiples. It's a tribe. And forget about children and women in the tribe. Think about the sheer number of like strong men who live in the desert in this tribe. What are the dynamics around race and gender that they are in a place where an elderly black woman with a baby, like two people who, what could they really do to you? Do you know? You go to Mecca now because of like kind of Arab Spring, historically, what's going on in Syria, all kinds of uprisings, like people in governmental apparatus are on their toes. We took a group for Umrah. Some of you have gone with us for Umrah. We're going to go in January this coming year, inshallah. You should try to join us if you can. And one of the years we went, there was a little kid who, no joke, he's probably like 5 years old. He and I were sitting in a hotel prayer room together, right? And there's cameras all over the place. And a guard came up to us in the hotel prayer room and said, "What are you doing here?" And we said, "We're praying." And he said, "But why are you gathered together?" And I was like, "It's me and a little kid. Like, what are you talking about?" And I said, "What's going on, man? Like, tell me, what's the problem?" And he was like, "You're not allowed to gather in these spaces." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you might incite revolution." And I was like, I'm 5 foot small, man. And this kid right here, he's like half the size of me and he's 6 years old. Like, you think we're going to incite revolution? When I went to Turkey and I'm getting on the plane to go assist people in the aftermath of an earthquake, and they call my name behind me as I'm going through the airplane door, and there's 4 federal law enforcement officers waiting to question me. Why do they need 4 of these guys to talk to me? What could I possibly do to any of these people? There's nothing that they owe this woman. Someplace along the line, there's a shift from what is at the founding of arguably the most blessed city in the world, that starts from the efforts of an old black woman and her infant child in a tribe that has a sense of respect for gender and race dynamics, that they don't do anything to her other than just agree. How is that possible? And what happens that makes it different for us? Why you want to know the seerah is because it makes things concrete. When you go into a masjid and they will put someone forward whose tajweed is atrocious. My friend Ismail, who leads us in Ramadan, may Allah preserve him and all of the guardians, the hufaz of his book. His recitation is great. Some of you have prayed behind him in Ramadan. We walk into masjids, they don't say, hey man, you lead the prayer. But they'll put somebody who is from a certain culture, who cannot recite Fatiha in any which way well, because they're not trying to play behind a black person. It was crazy when we went to Palestine, right? May Allah end the occupation there and make us a generation that sees a free Palestine. We went to Palestine right before COVID. Ismail was with us. He led prayers in the Dome of the Rock. The Palestinian people had no qualms in praying behind a black person. Women, you walk into most spaces. This is not about anything other than objective fact. If a masjid even has a space, something that is in a dank corner that makes no sense. My wife and I, when she was pregnant with our daughter, went to a masjid that was beautiful. No sensibility in the architectural design. She's a pregnant woman with a child. We had our daughter and she was pregnant with our son. She had to walk up and down 3 flights of stairs to get to a women's section, and she's pregnant. Pregnant lady's bladder is this small. She's got to run up and down. Nobody was thinking about women when they built this space. We stopped at another masjid when she was pregnant with our daughter that was on our way back to the city. The entrance for the men, large, beautiful door. Women's entrance was in a side alley surrounded by garbage bags. No exaggeration. No cameras. It's dark. It's Isha time. And I said, guys, I can't have my wife go in this situation down there. What if somebody does something to her? And they're like, no, she'll be fine. And can you come and give a talk here next week? And I'm like, let's be on the same page, bro. And I said, I can't come and speak at your masjid because this is not okay what you're doing. And all of you likely know somebody or have yourself experienced this. Race dynamics, gender dynamics, that you're wondering, where did this shift come in? If all of you wanted to steal my laptop right now, how could I keep you from stealing it? All of you came up with a plan that said, let's take all of the equipment. What could I do? What could I fundamentally do? Nothing. They didn't owe anything to this woman. The base of the barakah, in addition to the zamzam, comes from now understanding how to honor the rights of Allah's creation. Just like our Prophet, when he's given the option of choosing between milk and wine, when he goes on the Isra and Miraj, a journey from his home to the city of Jerusalem, ascends to the heavens, the angel gives him the option, and he chooses the milk over the wine, and the angel says, good, had you chosen otherwise, it would have been a source of ruin for your ummah. What are they seeing in that moment? And where does the transition come in here? Do you get what I mean? This is important to understand. It's not a landscape at this point that is stratified based off of things that we have going on in our society, which means it's also possible for people to not be jerks, right? If this group that is a tribe living in a desert is able to do this, and you gotta think, because I've been to parts of the world, some of you are from parts of the world, where water is so scarce, people will kill for water. And may Allah bless us to understand the ni'mah that is having just access to water whenever we want it. Because we don't realize that that's not how it works in most parts of the world. I just went to a place where I had to be dressed from a fixed standpoint strategically to be able to make wudu with the least amount of water possible, if not tayammum. Because for 2 days, no shower, ready to sleep in a car, because these people are just living outside with nothing. And there's a water fountain on every floor, and wudu faucets, and bathrooms, and there's a single stall bathroom that has a Muslim shower attached to it for ease of whatever. How can you not have praise for the divine with just these things that he's given us to, subhanAllah? They don't take it from her. She retains it. As they move forward now, Ismail alayhi salam, he marries into the Jurhum tribe. The Jurhum, they assume political kind of responsibility. Ismail alayhi salam assumes religious responsibility. We're going to talk about next week how we get from there to the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the messenger of God. We're going to also talk about what does the word sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the phrase, actually mean? Like, why do we say this? Over the course of the coming weeks, we'll explore some of the names and the characteristics of the Prophet of God. So if you were here last week, this is what we said was one of the sources of the Seerah literature. It's not just history and dates and like lineage, but it's also what we call the shama'il, the characteristics, the descriptions of the messenger of God. We're going to talk about all of these different parts and aspects to it, but ease our way into it. What we want to talk about today is what is more so now the social landscape, because something shifted. Something happened that they went from this place to a place where people like Bilal ibn Rabah, who is an Abyssinian slave, when he believes in God, they put a boulder on his chest, telling him to recant his belief in Tawheed. They go from having respect for people who come from underprivileged demographics. Nobody is like, oh man, that's like the son of the Prophet Abraham. That is the, wife of the Prophet Abraham. One of the things the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam does when he leaves his wife and child is from a distance, he can still see them. He makes dua to Allah. That, Ya Allah, I have left them near your sacred house. A dua for there to be a kind of multiple of progeny. People coming in mass. Duas made for like an increase in fruits and all these things. You ever go to Mecca and Medina and you sit in one of these hotels and eat at these buffets? They got fruit from all over the world. This is an answer to the duas of the Prophet Ibrahim. Peace be upon him. We want to understand this social setting to then think out also where we have a basis of why would Allah send a prophet at this time? Because there's nothing without meaning in God's plan. And when we know about the sending of prophets is not just simply that they're sent when things are going great, but usually they're sent when things are like a big mess. People need to be reminded about what it means to be human. And a lot of what we see right now, brothers and sisters in Libya dealing with floods, earthquakes taking place, the sporadic schizophrenia of the temperature in New York City, this is because humans are not living the way humans are supposed to live. And the rest of creation gets impacted when we are not good at being human. There's multiple religious contexts that exist in Arabia at the time the Prophet is now born and is given prophethood as well. You have the presence of monotheistic traditions, Judaism and Christianity, an indication that from their original source of kind of principles, theologies, there's shifts that have been made. but this exists. You have people who are Zoroastrian. They are fire worshippers. In our religion, it's important to understand. Surah Al-An'am, there's a verse that says, don't mock people for their religious beliefs. So this is not a conversation that's meant for us to say, why would somebody believe in this? You believe that there are angels on your shoulders. Go into your workplace and try to convince somebody to believe that. That's what our religion says. Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian, is one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He has deep, detailed account and narrative of what it was like for him to grow up in Persia, where they practiced this religion. We're not going to go into in too much detail in the interest of time. You can go and Google Salman al-Farsi biography and read what that was like. But it's a religion that was present. You had individuals that were also called Hanif. And the Prophet Abraham, he's described as being Hanif in the Quran a lot. People think about this in terms of monotheism and being somebody who espouses to a theology that there's one God. But the root of Hanif in Arabic, Hanafa, means to kind of turn away from something. Right? So they're turning away from what is also societally normative in that circumstance. They're not scared to tread their own path. When you read books of Seerah, they'll give you examples of individuals who are Hanif. One that is particularly deep is a man by the name of Zayd ibn Amr an-Nufail. He has a son who is a companion of the Prophet of God by the name of Sa'id ibn Zayd. This man asked the Prophet, what's going to happen to my father, who passed away before you started preaching Islam? This man who is Hanif. And to understand what his lifestyle was like, Zayd ibn Amr an-Nufail, he was somebody who would quite often, in his Hanafiya, reject a lot of the societal practices at that time. He wouldn't eat from food that was sacrificed in the name of any idol. There were all kinds of iniquitous practices that took place, but one in particular that was deeply atrocious was female infanticide. This is a tribal situation that we're going to talk about in like 10 minutes that's rooted in a principle that's called asabiya. They're really big on tribal culture. Lineage is important, and the extension of lineage is coming through sons, not daughters. People don't want to have daughters. There's a verse in the Quran where Allah poses the question to the people of Quraysh and to all of us, essentially asking, what will you do when the girl asks for what crime she had committed that you killed her? When we take people for Umrah, we go to a plot of land in Mecca with a Burmese sheikh who we're pretty close with that gives us a walking tour of Mecca. It's not like your typical sightseeing tour in Mecca. The people we know show us like things that most people don't see. And the first time I remember he took us to this piece of land and he said, this is where they used to bury women alive. It's an actual piece of earth. This man, Zayd ibn Amr an-Nufail, who was Hanif, he used to go to the fathers who were considering doing this atrocious practice and would say to them, if you don't want to look after your daughters, let me look after them. And his son now comes to the Prophet and says, what's going to happen to my dad? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he says, referring to a point of theology, that when you are risen on a day of judgment, it's a day where we're taken into account for all of our actions. May Allah grant us ease on that day. He says, people will stand behind the one that they claim to be a follower of. So the ummah of Musa alayhi salam, they'll stand behind Moses. Right? The ummah of Nuh alayhi salam, they'll stand behind the Prophet Noah. the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam will stand behind the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he said, on that day, when everybody is going to be standing behind the individuals that they were a nation of, your father's going to stand as a nation unto himself. He's not standing behind anybody. There was people like this at that time. They weren't the norm, but they were necessary. Just like today, there are people who they will get it done when it needs to get done. This religion is based off of understanding it's not just ritual and practice, but there is a synergy between ritual, spirituality, and ethics. They go hand in hand. Our religion does not divorce them. Good religion should bring its practitioner to take on societal ailments and injustices. If your practice of religion does not bring you to take on societal inequities, what is the point of your religion? This is what this man who was from this category of the Hanif were doing. They took their belief and then they acted upon it. Does it make sense? Then, important part for us to reflect upon, there is idolatry, which doesn't start with the Prophet Abraham. Because later on, and we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, the Prophet Ibrahim, he comes with his son. They establish the Kaaba. There are rites and rituals that are established in relation to it. When you have Eid al-Adha, you have in the Abrahamic tradition a ritual slaughter of an animal that is performed, that this is what these guys were actually doing in real time, right? This is happening at a time that is thousands of years before the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. Idol worshipping did not get created by people in Arabia. What our religion says is that during the time of the Prophet Noah, this is something that took place. That there were 5 individuals who were just known as good, pious, leaders. People looked up to them. And as they left from this world, Shaitan, the devil, comes to people and says, you know what's a good way for us to remember these people? We should build statues in their honor. And as generations pass, they stop remembering why it was made, but know that there's some veneration until they start to actually worship the idol itself. What happens in the context of Mecca, the Jurhum tribe, and we'll talk about this more, they essentially, over time, become also just not good human beings. They get kicked out by another tribe called the Khuzah. Before the Jurhum leave, they fill up the well of Zamzam. And this will be relevant when we talk about the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Amongst the leaders of the Khuzah tribe is a man by the name of Amr bin Luhay. They call him Al-Khuzai because he's of the Khuzah tribe. He goes on a merchant caravan to Sham, Syria, where there are people that historically are known as the Alchemites. The description of these individuals is such that they are very tall people, they have stature, these kinds of things. And Amr bin Luhay, he sees them worshiping idols. And he asks them, what are you doing? What is this thing? And they say, these are intermediaries between us and God. We worship them. And Amr says, this is a good thing. So they give him a god named Hubal. And he takes Hubal and he puts it right in the center of Mecca in front of the Kaaba. And he says to people, this is what we're going to do now. This thing I got from those guys who are really great, and they are tall and strong and have power and this and that. So we're going to worship in this way too. And because he's a leader in his community, people start to do what he says. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that I have seen Amr al-Khuzai in the nar, in the fire, dragging behind him his intestines. And the reason, they say, كان أول من بدل دين العرب. And in some narrations, دين الإسماعيل. He was the first one to change the religion of Ismail. They built out an entire economy from this practice. But I want you to think now about this principally. This decision of Amr bin Luhay al-Khuzai, what does it make you think about? How can you draw meaning from it relevant to where we are today? If you can turn to the persons next to you and discuss, and then we'll come back in like 2-3 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, so what are the things that it makes you think about? What comes up for people? Yeah.
We were talking about how Shaitan, he plays the long game, because I'm sure that first generation, as the statues were erected, they were maybe those people felt closer to God, but Shaitan's devious. He's really good at what he's okay, even if this generation gets closer to God, whatever, how much years down the line, it turns into this, people getting farther and farther away from God, so.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Ajay, Yasmin, and I were talking about, we just kind of really taken back at how such a small action was given. The Prophet Solomon was talking about how he was given such a big punishment, in that maybe he was just very vulnerable to a different type of thinking he wanted to bring into his tribe. And then we were just talking about, that's just such a severe punishment. But then we were talking about maybe that is the whole point, that you can be susceptible to somebody trying to make a change in how you think, and you may think it's something really small, but it has a huge impact for generations to come, and that in itself is something we have to be mindful of when we're thinking about changes that seem small. And then the other thing that we brought up, that Ajahn brought up, is that the intention of why he was doing this also matters. Was he potentially doing this because he was trying to figure out how to better worship God? Likely not. It was probably because it was an ego-driven thing where he just wanted to have a name or come with something like an innovation and be stronger or better like the other guy was.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit more, right? This guy is not a nobody where he comes from. Do you know what I mean? He has clout, he has influence, he has power. He's a leader in a community that is tribalistic, which is not an easy thing to do. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes. But there's no mode of governance, right? Have you ever read a book that says, this was the mayor of Mecca, this was the governor of Mecca? These things didn't exist, and he still had influence over people at that time. Why might he potentially be willing to change who he is when he's now with these people that are from some other place, that are more known and have more power, and they look a certain? This is how they're described, right? People describe them as being giants, whether that's a literal sense or not, but they're these tall, people that literally and metaphorically people are looking up to. What's going on here? Yeah.
I guess the seduction of the mirage or the glamour, and the willingness to make adaptations in order to fit that mirage.
Yeah.
So,
And it happens a lot, right? Go ahead.
I think it, in a way, reflects the process of assimilation, and in the process of trying to be like someone who we wish to be like, we make up a part of ourselves, and that's obviously something that we experience in our lives.
I worked at Princeton University for a year, long time ago. When I was 24, I worked at Princeton. And amongst many different things that became evident that Princeton is not a place for me for a variety of reasons, I was having a conversation with a woman who ran the International Center at Princeton. She was an elderly woman that came from an Asian background. And she extended her hand to me to shake, and I put my hand on my heart. I didn't shake her hand. And she didn't get upset or annoyed, but she started to cry. And she said, in my culture, we also don't shake hands across genders. And she said, when I came here, I didn't think anybody would accept me if I didn't. So I let go of a lot of who I am in order to be accepted by people who don't really pay me that much attention anyway, and I don't know how to go back to it. There's delusional senses of self. Superiority that creates a delusional sense of grandeur, inferiority that creates a delusional sense of insignificance, but they're purposely built in consumer-driven societies to make you feel less than and more than in order to have you continue to purchase what it is that fuels and responds to these things. This guy's got a lot going on for himself. But now he's in a space where everybody else is different from him, and he takes something and goes back to the people he has influence on and says, we're going to go be like these people. Just because a society has power, has affluence, has influence, has wealth, has prestige, doesn't mean that they also have a sound sense of ethics and morals. This country's biggest challenge is rooted in spiritual poverty. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. A lot of you in this room, not all of you, but a lot of you in this room, have people who came this way to seek materialistic gain. Nobody flies to New York City saying that I'm looking for enlightenment, right? They fly eastward, not westward. They come here looking to have success. It's not a good or a bad. There's people, man, may Allah make things easy for them. You might know people like this. You might have people in your families like this. They have to make the difficult decision. The Prophet Ibrahim, leaving his wife and child, he loves them. And he's praying for them. But he's got to get done what he's got to get done. I know fathers who leave their families not because they're bad fathers, but because they have to take jobs that will pay them minimum wage, working behind the counters of many spaces that you and I frequent, and they take the majority of that and send that back to a family that without it, their lives would be even more difficult. Right? May Allah increase them and grant them the best of places in the world beyond this one. There's a difference between that and walking into a space and believing that you are less than what you actually are. And the implications that that can then have also on the people around you. He goes in with a certain clout, but still sees himself as being in a place where there's an approach to validation. You can walk through all kinds of parts of the world that still have a strong presence of colonization. People who literally were told that you and everything you are is backwards. So you got to start to be who we are. This isn't a religion that tells us to mock people for their way of life and their culture. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. All of the children of Adam are dignified and elevated. But you have generational traumas that pass from experiences rooted historically, slavery, colonization, imperialism. We live in a country. I was just in New Mexico, and when I was there, we were leading a retreat. Some of you were on the retreat. We were there a couple of days before the retreat participants came. I visited local indigenous communities, people whose ancestors were the recipients of genocidal violence at the hands of settlers and colonizers. And they're in a place where their entire existence was just turned upside down. And they're trying to stay true in whatever capacity they can now, after centuries of being denigrated by people. And I kid you not, this young woman who was walking us through what's called a pueblo. There's 19 of them in that region that were all areas where indigenous communities, Native Americans, are living off the grid in accordance with their cultural heritage, clay houses that they build upon each other, no Wi-Fi, no running water, none of this stuff. And she's talking meticulously, beautifully about how inquisitions and Catholicism and colonizers just literally devastated their people's entire existence. And aside from myself and my family, my friend Daoud Yassin, who is a sheikh, he's a tall black man, and a couple of other people, we're also minorities, everybody else was probably like 70 to 90 and elderly and white. I'm not saying this to stereotype, I'm saying it for you to get perspective in your head. And as this girl is talking and opening up, the first thing somebody whispers behind me to someone standing next to them is, "She speaks English so well. I didn't think she could do that." Do you get what I'm saying? When you live in this society where the Sunnah teaches us that a time will come where holding on to a Sunnah is going to be like you're holding on to a flaming coal. It's going to be hard. But you don't want to let go of parts of who you inherently are, because it's really hard to get them back. And this man, principally in our tradition, is responsible for every person who acted on his sense of insecurity in who he is. When you teach somebody something good, every time they act upon it, the opposite is true. You get benefit for that. So it boggles my mind when people take their kids and they tell other people to teach them how to pray or how to read Quran. Literally, if I teach my kids how to pray, and they teach their kids how to pray, and they teach their kids how to pray, every time that person prostrates, I'm getting benefit for some of that. It's not hard stuff, man. You don't have to just sit instructionally, but you walk into a room where people are idiots, right? Think about how many Muslim spaces you walk into and nobody says salam to anybody else. What if you were the person that taught someone that they're actually noticed and they're not alone? And you help them to adopt the sunnah of just smiling at somebody and greeting those that they know and those that they didn't know. How could the Prophet not be happy to see you on the Day of Judgment? Do you get what I mean? And you start to understand it from this place of, I have something to offer. This is not a religion that roots itself in the pursuit of perfection. It's a dumb pursuit. But you move away from inferiority and superiority senses of self that are delusional senses of self, and you understand your existence through a prism of reflection that's interiority. I'm not in competition with you. You're not in competition with me. It's purposeful in a consumer-driven society where there's no sense of something bigger. I just got to be the best at everything all the time, and I'm always in a fight with you. Versus, I'm just looking within myself, and I'm not scared that the person I am today can potentially meet the person I can become tomorrow. And I believe in a God that believes in me more than I believe in myself. That's not just watching me, but watching over me. One that loves me more than a mother loves its child. That doesn't have to give me a sense of elevation by denigrating somebody else or letting go of who it is that I am. And so here, he's in a place that you see this quite often in a lot of different places, where that sense of validation is rooted now in becoming other than what you are in order to be accepted by people who only take you when you become that which you are not. You don't want to do that. Does it make sense? The religious landscape impacts now the social landscape and the political landscape. This is not a society that has modes of governance. They move from a place now where the founding is rooted in a respect that a elderly black woman and her infant baby are honored and said that you will have ownership over X, Y, and Z. To a place now where the strength of a demographic is rooted in not just the strength of the strongest members of a tribe, but in the weakest members of the tribe. The underserved and underprivileged, we're all connected to the powerful. So if I'm of a lower social class, but he's of the elite, and we're of the same clan, he's got a responsibility to take care of me. What happens now when Hubal, the idol, is brought in, and an entire industry that Mecca, having the remnants of an Abrahamic tradition that still honors things like doing tawaf around the Kaaba and all kinds of other things intertwined with various religious theologies, they start making money off of this stuff. They are the religious elite. Everybody in Arabia comes to Mecca. And when they're coming, they're selling all of these things to people. And now when I'm in a place where you are still responsible for me as a clan person, but I don't really want to have your back the way I used to. Because what's important to me now is wealth and the retainment of power. Theologically, they have a belief in Allah, but they don't have a belief in an afterlife. There's no sense of accountability. This is why almost every page of the Quran, a ton of hadith, are rooted in this construct. Man kana yu'minu billahi wa bil yawm al-akhir. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day. If you think this is it, which is what modernity and secularism and modernity is rooted in. It's not just godless, that you can't walk into a space and say, thank God, praise be to God, God willing, or any of these things. Its secularity is rooted in an idea that there's nothing that happens after this. You don't have the presence of a sense of accountability, which allows for people to care less about my role in helping someone who's a survivor of an earthquake or a survivor of a flood, or even being empowered, because the curriculum and pedagogy isn't rooted in what our religion is rooted in. Imam al-Razi, who's a well-known Muslim scholar from an earlier period of Islam, he divides our relationship to faith into two broader categories. He said, what's all this about? Ibadat al-Khaliq, worship of the Creator, wa khidmat al-Khalq, and service of the creation. That's it. That's what everything comes back to. But you get paralyzed. This is what I was talking about at Jummah last Friday, when we were talking about Surat al-Ma'arij, and the individuals who get to a place. Verse 19, 20, 21, when something bad happens, they get overwhelmed. When something good happens, they get overwhelmed. It gets translated as stinginess, but it's not stinginess in the sense that I'm greedy, but I'm so afraid that I have the money. If I spend it on something, then what will I do tomorrow if I need it? Do you get what I mean? In this system, they have presence now of racism, classism, sexism. It's there. Lineage makes all the difference. But there's also no mode of structured governance. Accountability is not something that is always guaranteed. Your rights will not be restored unless the elite in your clan are willing to go head to head with somebody else. And as money starts to circulate a little bit differently, it changes up a little bit differently. What the Prophet has to do when he is introduced as a prophet to these people is not only convince them that, hey, you know what? We actually need somebody to listen to, and the person you got to listen to is me. After they have not listened to anybody other than the people who are the heads of their own tribes. The tribalism has benefits to it, where you are responsible for those who are a little bit weaker, but it also creates a lot of challenges, a lot of warring, a lot of animosity, there's a lot of difficulty. You don't want to think about it in the sense of it's like a wild, wild west type situation, but a little bit it actually is. Because how can a human get to a place where they have conviction, believing that it's the right thing to do, whatever their theological system is, to bury their daughters alive in the ground? How is that possible? But it's not any different when a young woman walks into my office, brilliant as brilliant can be, capacity to pursue all kinds of degrees, opportunities would be open to her, and she says, my parents tell me there's no point to go to school and they're just going to force me to get married to someone. Literally burying her alive still. This is a situation that the Prophet Muhammad is introduced into. He's coming into this place where there are remnants of monotheism, there are remnants of the presence of other religions, there are people who are Hanif, there are people who are fire worshippers, there are people who are idol worshippers. The political landscape is one where there's like a loose structure in this tribalistic society. Asabiya is what it's called, tribalism. The social standings are rooted now in power dynamics that are held by the few. It's not any different where you have the majority of wealth sitting in the hands of percentages of people in comparison. My son was walking with me today. I was dropping him to school, and he said, Baba, what did he say? He said, Baba, do you know how much the CEO of Uber makes in an hour? And I said, no, my 8-year-old son, tell me, what does an Uber CEO make? And he quoted some like large multi-million-dollar number, right? And he said, you know how much an Uber driver makes on average per hour? And I said, no, tell me, Kareem. He said, $9 an hour, Baba. And I said, why do you know this, Kareem? And he said, I was watching a video where they were talking about this. Our Sunday school teacher showed it to me. And I was like, thank God you go to the Sunday school you go to. Because in my Sunday school, when I was little, they weren't telling me things like that. How does that discrepancy come in? How is it not any different? The elite, the powerful, the privileged, they are the ones that determine and dictate. They define how things go. The Prophet comes to upend this systemic and structural societal challenges. Belief in one God, belief in an afterlife, is meant to be a robust theology that informs decision-making, shifts paradigms, says that, man, you can't be doing this nonsense anymore. It's not okay. As much as it also shifts to, here's how we actually build things and get things going and get things done. He comes to a place where, like other prophets, the initial followers are those who are destitute and weak in places of poverty, and builds in such a way where 23 years of revelation later, he walks into the city of his birth that had pushed him out and persecuted and boycotted and abused. And now when he is reclaiming control of the city, he doesn't carry out any acts of aggression or violence, but he walks by house after house and says, the family of so-and-so is forgiven today. The family of so-and-so is forgiven today. Because he's not doing it for his ego. He's just doing it because he knows it's the right thing to do. To get to that place, we have to understand how some of these other things function within the city of Mecca, drawing principles from some of these things. So we're going to take a pause in 5 minutes to pray Isha. What I'd like for you to do is just turn to the persons next to you. What are you taking away from tonight's conversation? What is it bringing up for you? And we'll kind of discuss. We'll call the adhan and we'll make salah. We'll pray Isha, inshallah. But go ahead, and then we'll debrief really quick, make a couple announcements, then we'll stand to pray. Okay. So what are some of the takeaways from today? Yeah.
I was like thinking, like these issues,
Yeah, the Seerah makes things concrete. Prophet Abraham is married to a black woman. His son Ismail is the child of that marriage. Is the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam also someone who's black? You know, in the way that Hajar, peace be upon her, is black. There's so much that you can extrapolate from this, right? Islam inherently needs culture to exist. It can't live in a vacuum. The danger of removing text from context and trying to homogenize something that's not meant to be homogenous, that says all of us should look the same and has a strange approach to individualism that removes individuality in a healthy way. The companions were all different from each other, and we're going to see this as we go through the Seerah. Abu Bakr is not the same as Umar, who's not the same as Uthman, who's not the same as Ali, right? Islam in China looks Chinese. Islam in Malaysia looks Malaysian. The challenge comes when it becomes absolute. Like, this is what is kind of going on there. Do you know? What else? What else are we taking away from today? Yeah, go ahead.
So I just thought it was interesting earlier today. I was taking a gender-based violence course, and we were talking about being European. First, we were also talking about Sete, like tribalism, kind of tradition of burning women whose husbands passed away, and so it was just interesting to have this discussion about also like patriarchal practices and I'm just more interested also in Zayd ibn Amr that, like, this is the first time that I'm hearing about him, so did I say it wrong?
Yeah, Zayd ibn Amr an-Nufail, right? He becomes a relative of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who is also Umar ibn al-Khattab an-Nufail, right? They have a relation between the two of them. You know, and that's where, like, lineages to just rotely memorize are not... You know why you want to know these names and how they relate to each other? It's for the same reason why, like, this country, when you watch videos of, like, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers and all these people, they're not ever in the same video together because people don't want you to realize that they all had overlap in their lives. They make the videos also black and white when those videos could be in color because they want you to think that it happened, like, so long ago, when it didn't happen that long ago, right? And when you can start to think, like, man, Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and these guys are all contemporaries of each other. Like, what's going on there? Why is it important to know that this person is related to this person? And then you see the decisions and choices that they make. When you can recognize how they're building together, not as individuals where you're just rotely memorizing and spitting out, but not really thinking, right? Why is it important to understand that everybody was there when Bilal stood on the Kaaba at Fath al-Makkah and called the adhan? And they see, like, their prized possession that is the epicenter of their economy, and the Prophet manifests the idea, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that the highest amongst you is the one who has the most taqwa, and Bilal's literally above all of them. The people who persecuted him as a slave, they used to say disgusting things about this man, calling him a black crow, calling him the son of a black woman, right? And it was black Arabs that were calling him this. Abu Dhar says this to him in an argument. And what's crazy is Abu Dhar is black himself. He's a black Arab. He's saying you're a son of an African in a derogatory way. Do you get what I mean? The Seerah makes it real. It makes it concrete, you know? And it makes it necessary, right? And so knowing how these people are connected, knowing that they exist, that makes it now something aspirational. Why does my belief in God not make me get up for others the way it made this man who's going to stand as a nation unto himself? I got to want it. I got to want to be the person that doesn't turn my cheek. It's not okay if you know a woman is being abused and you make excuses for it. It's not okay. It's not okay that you don't even know if your neighbor's stomach is empty. This is basic hadith, right? And this is what's going to make it alive, you know? The Prophet is praising this man who took on social inequity, right? And we're going to see a lot of characters like this when we're reading the prophetic biography, and they lived, historically, they lived, and they were going up against challenges. You think all these people were good with this man doing this? Walking around saying, you know what, it's wrong for you to bury your daughters alive? I go into masjid sometimes to speak, and they say to me at the end, you can't say what you're saying. And I'll say, why? They'll say, because so many of our donors abuse their wives. If they hear you talk about domestic violence in this way, they're going to stop donating to us. It's insane. You get what I mean? So Zayd ibn Amr al-Nufail, who is of a small demographic of being Hanif, he's still getting it done. I want to have a heart like that. Do you get what I mean? I want to be motivated to live in that way. That's the point of studying this thing. Not so it's just stories, but to say, how does it shape my life? And I definitely don't want to be at the other end of it. Because if this man, because he is standing up against injustice, is getting this honor in the afterlife, what do you think is happening to the perpetrator of injustice? So don't make excuses, because the Seerah is telling you you're going to stand in front of God too. So you can't be playing games with people's lives, regardless of what culture says. Other thoughts, other takeaways before we wrap up? Great. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.